please join me to welcome Congressman Patrick Kennedy to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mickey, and thank you for your leadership, and to Tom and so many of the other leaders in our country in this field of research. I just hope Bruce and Steve and Jerry and Ann all make sure they forward me the easy questions. 50 years ago, my Uncle John F. Kennedy stood not too far from here in Los Angeles and accepted the Democratic nomination for president. He did so at a time when America was affluent, but it was anxious. Many Americans worried that their rising fortunes had reached a plateau, that a pioneering spirit was part of our past, not our future, that other nations, competitor nations, would soon take the lead in science and technology. John F. Kennedy rejected these notions. When he came to California half a century ago, he brought with him a vision of the future, defined not by promises, but by challenges. He asked Americans to join in a shared spirit of purpose, to embrace an age where, I quote, "We will witness not only new breakthroughs in weapons of destruction, but also a race for mastery of the sky and the rain, the oceans and the tides and the far side of space." And he said, and the inside of men's minds. This was the vision that captured the American imagination, and this is what he called the new frontier. As we now know, time was not on my uncle's side, but history was. The Peace Corps, the Moonshot, the Green Revolution, Silicon Valley, the Human Genome Project, we have explored, we have pioneered. We have met so many of the challenges that John F. Kennedy described, except one. While we have mapped the great galaxies of hundreds of millions of light years away, and mapped the genome of countless plant and animal species, and mapped out computer circuits that perform billions of calculations per second, our map of the human brain is incomplete. As a result, our ability to understand and to treat the brain is inadequate. This is not to say we haven't made progress. Thanks to the brilliant and dedicated people, many of whom are in this room, we know more about the brain than ever before. But we've lacked a galvanizing moment. We've had the war on cancer, but never a war on Alzheimer's. We've had a war on poverty, but never a war on Parkinson's. As a result, progress has been painfully slow. To develop and gain approval for a new treatment takes about 18 years, and the number of FDA-approved new molecule entities has actually declined. Recently, pharmaceutical company investment has declined with it. I suppose it's possible to look at these facts and say, the pace of discovery is uneven. That's just the way it is. But I say it's long past time to redouble our efforts, to refocus our work, and to marshal the American spirit towards this great challenge. So when people ask me, after more than 2 decades in politics, what's next for me, I tell them with pride, the brain is our next frontier. The journey across this next frontier is not one that we can take individually as scientists, public officials, private citizens, or disease-specific advocacy groups. Yes, we must cure autism. Yes, we must prevent Alzheimer's. Yes, we must end the suffering that goes with each various brain disorder. But we must also remember that all of our future successes will stem from the study of one organ. Until we understand the brain better, we are on the proverbial journey of 1,000 miles, but we are taking separate roads. Together, we must build an interstate, a way to get to a common destination, a common set of discoveries, even as we also build the off-ramps to that interstate highway that will represent the individual therapeutic treatments for specific genetic disorders. That is our cause, and it's personal to me. A few months ago, I commemorated the first anniversary of my father's death to brain cancer. For me, it was a time of sadness, but also gratitude. In fact, I called my father's neurosurgeon, and I thanked him. I said if it weren't for him, it probably would have been the second anniversary of my dad's passing. And my father used that extra year very well. He finished his memoirs. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention. He cast crucial votes on health care that were his life's work. And most importantly, he and I had a chance to be closer. Mental health issues have been a focal point of my time in Congress. The Mental Health Parity Act, which I was proud to sponsor, provided 140 million Americans with mental health insurance benefits on par with other physical disorders. And as many of you know, I face my own struggles with dependency. So yes, this is personal to me. But it's also personal to millions of Americans, approximately 100 million Americans who suffer from a neurological condition. Every year, our nation loses $1 trillion of productivity to brain diseases. But the real loss cannot be measured in the money we spend. It's the hours we spend caring. It's the tears we shed over diseases that still carry a social stigma. One way to measure the burden of disease is to look at the total number of life years lost to ill health and disability and early death. In the United States and Canada, brain diseases account for nearly 30% of the total lost years to illness. And it's not just morbidity, it's mortality. Last year, there were 34,000 suicides in America, 90% of them caused by mental illness. Having a major mental illness takes an average 27 years from your life. Here's what those lost years add up to. We don't have a moment to waste. And the urgency is growing every day. Consider the veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. Traumatic brain injury has often been described as the signature wound of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. These wounds occurred in other wars, but to be sure, this time they're occurring more frequently and are being diagnosed more often. To a large extent, this is because of amazing advances in medicine. Young men and women who would have died if they suffered those similar injuries in Normandy or in the jungles of Vietnam are now returning home. That's good news. But let's not forget, they are taking their battlefield with them. Pentagon officials have estimated 360,000 Iraq and Afghan war veterans have suffered brain trauma and disorders and disability overseas. These veterans are medical prisoners of war, prisoners of their war injuries that are often being treated as invisible. Yet if they were being held hostage behind the enemy lines by Al-Qaeda or by the Taliban, we as a nation would think nothing of putting the full might of military power behind going in there and setting them free. So why are we hesitating when it comes to setting them free again, this time from being held hostage to their neurological disorders that are induced as a result of traumatic brain injury and trauma? You see, I'm told the rate of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other neurological disorders of every kind will continue to take these soldiers hostage and continue to imprison them throughout their lives. And I believe that it's the neuroscientist who's going to be the first responder. You will be the ones who dare to go behind the enemy lines of the unknown. You, through your research, are going to shed a light that will allow these medical POWs to find a way home to their families, to their communities, and our country. The number of medical POWs is staggering. I was at a meeting with General Pete Corelli, the U.S. Vice Army Chief of Staff, and here's what he told me. We are losing more soldiers to suicide and high-risk behavior than to combat. On average, every day, 18 veterans commit suicide. That's a shockingly high number. The worst part is, we all know they're undercounting because of the stigma of this phenomena. That number does not include active duty soldiers who are still in uniform, who are still taking their lives at record rates. In fact, the last month statistics were published, it revealed that more soldiers died from their own hand than were killed in combat. And perhaps the most literal way that our soldiers are becoming medical POWs is when our country locks them up for their untreated brain injuries. A 15-month study by the U.S. Army found that the number of misdemeanors doubled amongst veterans between 2004 and 2009. The number of felonies tripled. All of these incidents occur with no enemy personnel in sight. But make no mistake, these are combat wounds. These are combat casualties. A few months ago, I heard testimony from one of my own Rhode Island National Guardsmen, Kit Parker. He said to me something very powerful. He said, Congressman Kennedy, if our soldiers die back here at home prematurely from a wound that they sustained in battle, or if they come down with a dreaded disorder of some kind, or in short, if they take their own lives, he said, they can get us on the battlefield, they can get us over there, but when they come home and our soldiers die as a result of these wounds, it's a win for the terrorist. They don't care where they get us, whether they get us over there or whether they get us here at home because of the wounds sustained over there. It's a win for the terrorist. And let me also say that we make a grave mistake when the trouble that attaches ourselves to these returning soldiers, when we describe them and characterize them as a criminal justice statistic rather than a public health statistic. So long as these challenges these soldiers are facing are defined as behavioral, psychological, they're stigmatized. You, the neuroscientists, can rescue our soldiers and veterans not only from being prisoners of their brain injury, but also from being held hostage to the stigma that comes with these injuries. By defining these wounds as physiological, combat wounds, rather than psychological, behavioral, mental health, we will win this war for our veterans on two fronts, and win it we must. When the Army continues to refuse to award a Purple Heart to those soldiers whose combat wounds occurred in the brain, this act of ignorance is not simply just unjust, but practically it compromises our soldiers who, if they award the Purple Heart, receive extra benefits and a greater priority in terms of treatment by the VA. The veteran is a catalyst for a new focus on brain research. But that same research that helps our soldiers and our veterans can help their parents, their brothers, and their sisters and their children. We're making significant investments in traumatic brain injury. But this isn't a case where we don't know what we don't know. It's often a case where we don't know what we do know. And that is because we haven't even defined the common data element sets for traumatic brain injury within the civilian sector. As a result, both the soldier and the civilian alike are paying a high price because of the lack of information sharing. If this were truly a fight that we were in it to win it, if we were truly wanting to save our soldiers and our family members, we would marshal all the resources necessary to do whatever it took to make sure that we wouldn't leave them behind. I believe that the moonshot should be our guiding star in this new national security endeavor to protect our men and women in the military and to protect their families in our country. The moonshot was a national call to action to bring every pertinent scientific discipline to achieve the improbable. Today, like then, we are entering uncharted territory. And that's why we must make it clear what the specific goals are that we seek to achieve. For after all, John F. Kennedy did not merely challenge us to explore space, he challenged us to put a man on the moon and return them home safely. That's what the moonshot was all about. And when President Kennedy made his bold proposition, going to the moon not only seemed impossible, it was unimaginable. The moon was outer space, and outer space was the very definition of the unknown. At the time, people understood walking on the moon like they understood a fairy tale, something imaginary, and it was intriguing. But to claim that we'd actually go there was unthinkable. To be sure, curing these neurological disorders is no less daunting. The brain is not just the most mysterious organ in the body, it's the most complex known to humanity. With hundreds of billions of nerve cells and an unquantifiable number of connections and levels of interaction between the cells, the brain works at a level of complexity that is simply incredible and unimaginable. And yet somehow, to uncover the causes of depression, suicide, dementia, schizophrenia, to save our veteran, we must commit ourselves to understand, deeply understand, how that brain works. So as we embark on what I like to call the moonshot to inner space, we need to ask ourselves, where do we need to go? What do we need to get there? And who will be our astronauts? I'll begin with the first question, where do we need to go? The first step is understanding. We have an Earth observing system, a space observing system, celestial observing systems. We need one for the brain. Imagine an objective monitoring system that will permit continuous measurement and monitoring of brain activity, and will be able to send back signals to specifically activate or inhibit neurons. When we have this kind of interactive brain observatory, we will be able to determine at the molecular and at the circuitry level what's working and what's not. In essence, we need engineers to engineer the most powerful telescope for viewing inner space. Part of this will be genomics. Imagine for a minute the Brain Disorder Genome Project, which will collect tens of thousands of DNA samples for every major brain disorder, and analyze them, sequence them, look into their epigenome qualities, and store all this information in a publicly accessible repository. Imagine if we had a Human Genome Atlas project, which compiled and studied all the genes of the brain, across their development, across gender. Imagine a GPS for the human brain, with an address for every single cell based not only on location, but the connections and its genetic profile. In connectomics, a human neurotaxonomy project would help us define cell types in the human brain. The Human Connectome Project will help us store the wiring maps of the brain's neural networks. With a variation across thousands of individuals, it will finally give us the ability to determine and track healthy and unhealthy brain activity and anatomy. These things don't exist today. They've been proposed, they've been described, they've been imagined, but they've not yet been developed. But with the right resources, the right amount of cooperation, and most importantly, with the right urgency, we can get this done. We must also develop standardized integrated clinical data for broad sharing. This is already happening in some areas. 80% of autism patients will be partners in the National Database for Autism Research, but we can do more. Imagine if every patient was a partner in that effort. And this isn't just about healing trauma and defending against diseases. Advances in neuroscience will teach us to be better teachers of our children. A better understanding of the brain will help us maximize personal potential, figuring out how we can increase our ability to absorb information and make sense of it. I truly believe that curing the wounds of one battlefield can help us succeed in another battlefield, the global economic battlefield. So where are we going? And what do we need to get there? It's not just neuroscience or biomedical research that we need. We need engineering. We need physics so we can develop the tools for understanding the brain. We need social science on our agenda as well. Communication is changing how we take the same social networking principles behind Twitter and Facebook and use them to connect researchers. How can we expand and amplify our understanding without networking? And we need political science as well. We need to generate the political will for brain research. And the simple truth that I've learned in politics, legislators on our National Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act only came aboard when their voters and their donors made it a priority. So advocacy is essential. Advocacy primes the pump. It provides air cover, and it starts the process of generating the support you need to do the research we need. That's why I'm announcing a new organization, Vote Your Mind campaign, dedicated to supporting brain research throughout the political process. It's not partisan in the sense of Democratic or Republican. It is partisan in the sense that every one of us should be a partisan to this issue. We can't hope for more or better government. We have to demand it. Our legislative agenda must also include education and training, not only of clinical neuroscientists who are ready and able to help, but thousands of new therapists trained in cognitive behavioral therapy for post-traumatic stress. For TBI, for Alzheimer's, for autism, we should not accept waiting lists. We should not accept waiting lists for our veterans to get treatment for their combat wounds. Imagine a generation of 20,000 healers trained in neuroscience and medicine, ensuring that no one gets left behind. And some of the things we need are less tangible. We need to renew our pioneering spirit. I met with Dan Golden this Saturday. He was the longest-serving director of NASA, our National Aeronautics and Space Agency. He took what was then a 10-year effort to deploy a Mars rover, and he made it a 3-year effort at a fraction of the cost. He told me the key to that success was making sure that we reward risk. He said that there will be failure, numerous failures, but that failure was the key to success. And this is from a guy who knows how to achieve goals. The other thing we need, and this may be the most important of all, is we need as a community to understand the big picture. We must all be of one mind when it comes to brain research. I think we can all agree, while there's plenty of cutting-edge work happening amongst all of you, it's often fragmented. We fund research one disease at a time, one treatment at a time. That would be like putting the man on the moon by building a spacesuit here, a rocket there, a lunar landing there, and then hoping all of it works together. Of course, that's not how we did the space program. And frankly, that's not the way we're going to do the inner space program. Let's get all the different researchers under one umbrella so we can learn from each other. I've seen firsthand, in the right circumstances, research for one condition that develops treatment for another. My family's foundation, the Joseph E. Kennedy Jr. Foundation, funded researches into the cause of a condition which affected my Aunt Rosemary. And my Aunt Eunice was the driving force behind the inception of the Institute for Child and Human Development, which frankly is the only institute at the NIH which bears anyone's name, and appropriately so, the Eunice Kennedy Shriver Institute. That research, and the irony is here's this. The work that was done on dementia in that institute has helped pave the way for a greater understanding of another member of my family, my Uncle Sarge, who has Alzheimer's. Imagine, years ago, we were in it to win it for my aunt, and now that research is helping us succeed for my Uncle Sarge. We must create these kinds of partnerships, both public and private, and we should draw on our past successes. In 1986, the US semiconductor industry was struggling. 14 semiconductor manufacturers and the US government came together in a partnership called Semitech to solve common problems by combining resources and sharing risks. In its first 8 years, Semitech allowed the United States semiconductor industry to regain market share, so much so that it was disbanded in 1996. If this kind of success story is possible for computers, then I believe it's possible for the most important computer of them all, the brain. We need to invest in research into the semiconductors of the brain. We need to provide for a common platform for understanding which breakdowns, which short circuits lead to neurological disorders. And that leads me to my last question about the moonshot for inner space and who will be our astronauts. This is a tricky question. Landing on the moon, in many ways, was a symbolic act. But when it comes to treating brain disorders, as you saw with Glenn Close and her family the other day, this is all but symbolic. It's personal. She reminded all of us that we are strongest when we face these challenges together, as an American family, as well as in our own families. That's what President Kennedy said when he said that great speech on civil rights. He said at the time, who amongst us would trade the color of their skin and be content with the counsels of patience and delay? That could easily be said of those with neurological disorders. That could easily be said of those with traumatic brain injury. Who amongst us would be willing to trade conditions with those veterans, with a family member with Parkinson's or MS, or a child with autism, if they knew, if they could be content with the counsels of patience and delay in neuroscience? As a member of Congress, I've seen what all of you can do. If the American people could see how you could be the ones that unlock the mysteries of the mind and free not only our veterans, but free every American plagued with a neurological disorder, we as America would not be content with the counsels of patience and delay. It's all too personal. I'm asking each of you to make a giant leap into this exploration of the new frontier. We need to summon the spirit of shared purpose that my uncle called for 50 years ago. When I ask who will be the astronauts, the answer is all of us, each of us. Today I'm asking you to take a small but crucial step towards signing our mission statement. If you feel that the pace of progress is too slow, that the urgency that this moment demands is too great, that we as a nation can do better, I'm asking you to speak up by publicly pledging your support for this mission and this campaign online. So all of you with your laptops out there, okay? Online, www.moonshot.org. And after we've taken that step together, I'd ask you to think about what your own next steps will be, what each of us can do to move forward, to move together, to increase the goals of understanding and ultimately the treatment of these neurological disorders. Many of you will solve the most important questions of our time. The questions of how the brain works. Some of you will develop the tools that'll help us figure out the mysteries of memory and learning. Some of you will figure out how the experience shapes the developing brain. Some of you will reveal galaxies of neurons that we don't even know about. With the right focus and the right vision, you can make all the difference. My Uncle Bobby, in a speech in Cape Town, South Africa, back in 1966, to a group of black South Africans who never thought they'd ever see the end of an apartheid, said, each of us can work to change just a small portion of events, but in the totality of all those acts will be written the history of our generation. In other words, it's not going to be one person that solves the world's problems. But if each of us works together, we can make history. Some would say we shouldn't even try. They'd say that it's too complex for pharmaceutical companies, that it's too costly for our political process. But I say that's exactly why it's worth trying. Let us do the things that John F. Kennedy said, quote, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. My uncle used to like to tell the story of a French marshal, Léoté, who once asked his gardener to plant a tree. And the gardener objected, saying that tree grows too slow. It won't reach full maturity for 100 years. The marshal then replied to his gardener, in that case, there's no time to lose. Plant it this afternoon. We know that exploring the next frontier will be complex, and we know it'll be challenging. But even as I speak, there are veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. There are children being born with autism. Our parents and grandparents are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It's for them that we must commit ourselves to planting the seed of something truly great. It's for them that we must commit ourselves to planting it today. Thank you very much.
And now we have some time for questions for Congressman Kennedy. Bruce, would you start off, please?
Congressman, thank you very much for your inspiring and heartfelt remarks. Here's a question. The amazing advances in brain research over the past 40-plus years in mental health and also basic brain processes often come from unexpected directions and have emerged over long time periods. The question is, from your knowledge of Congress and the political process, how best can we achieve sustained support for brain research and other aspects of biomedical research?
As I said, the key to neuroscience is political science. The veteran not only kicked down the doors overseas, the veteran, when they come home, are going to kick down the doors again. They're going to kick down the doors of medical breakthrough because we won't be able to abide by leaving them behind. That will allow us to go to the FDA and say, release your information on failed experiments, because those failures, first of all, we can't spend precious resources on duplicating them because we don't know about them. We need to go out there and break down all kinds of silos. The veteran is the animating catalyst to allow us to do this. When people ask me, well, you know, Congressman, this is very expensive. This is going to be hugely costly. How do we do it? You try to bring up cost to the people that put their lives on the line for us. We will spare no expense to bring them home. My uncle has Alzheimer's. Family members, like everyone else, have these diseases. In Washington, there'll be competing interests for funding cancer and diabetes and everything under the sun. If you bring this outside of medical research as a political cause, and you make this a national security endeavor that is about saving our American heroes, we'll have all the money we need. We'll have all the cooperation we need. And there isn't a member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, that can turn their back on our nation's veterans. There isn't a member of Congress who, as much as they talk about deficit reduction and saving money, which, by the way, we'll be able to justify this in terms of money saved, because, as I say, an ounce of research is worth a pound of care. The numbers are there to justify why to do this for the deficit. But the point I'm making is we don't even have to get into that conversation, which is a loser for anybody wanting to get more money, if it's for the veteran. Because we should spare no expense to be there for the very people who are there for us, who kept those bombers from coming back and destroying us. We need to go to every corporate leader in America and say, put up. You want to know what would have happened if those veterans hadn't been over there keeping those suicide bombers at bay? They would be blowing up backpacks in every major shopping mall in America. Those retailers in America need to step up, because those veterans shouldn't wait a day longer to be set free.
Thank you.
Steve, you're next.
No, thanks. Thank you, Congressman. I'd like to personally also thank you and your family for what you've done for this country. But I would like to also ask a question. And most of the questions I got had to do with funding. You already had a discussion of that. But I want to read one from a veteran who suffers from depression, a veteran from our current wars, who's a neuroscientist, apparently in the audience. And this ties in with this idea that we need new ideas to solve these problems. He's a young scientist who wants to go to graduate school, and he wants to know how he can get funding to pursue his career in neuroscience when he himself suffers from the depression and the wounds of the Iraqi war.
That's why we need a political campaign to look at this from the 30,000-foot level, because this will be not only about doing basic science and research, but applied translational research that's not getting funding today. And it'll be about the research of service delivery. Under this healthcare bill, which people may agree or disagree with, but the fact is we give enormous discretion to the new Director of Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services to implement demonstration projects. We need to reimburse, if we're truly about health care and not sick care, we need to reimburse for non-medical. The person that helps my Uncle Sarge the most doesn't have a medical degree, but he's integral to the primary health care of my Uncle Sarge. The person that drives for my friend with Parkinson's is keeping him independent. That's primary care, keeping him out of a hospital, out of a nursing home. The fact is, we need supportive employment. We need supportive living. We need supportive housing, reimbursed. We can do that now. At the same time as we're building a scientific endeavor to actually come to save people from these disorders or disability after they get them through stem cell research and restorative regenerative tissue research. So my point again is, in Washington, everything is getting capped. Discretionary spending on HHS, on the National Institutes of Health, on education and human services, all of it is being capped. No more money. But guess where there is more money? Department of Defense. That's not capped. Guess where there is more money? VA. That's not capped. We need to go where the money is. And the new money, Tom Insel wishes it was going to NIMH. Story Landis wishes it goes to NINDS. Nora Volkow wishes it was going to NIDA, and likewise with everybody else. We got to co-opt the money that's going into DOD and VA and make it more effective. We have the Intrepid Center, co-located out at NIH along with Bethesda's Naval Hospital, where our veterans are being treated for TBI. We need to build those public-private partnerships that are going to accelerate research by laying on top of the government work private investment. Because what we're going to do is say to the pharmaceutical companies who don't see their business model in researching these drugs, let's help you help us. Let's do the basic work that is too costly for you to do. Let's open up the medicine cabinet, as Tom says, to existing compounds and find out whether we can de-risk future therapies and make it plausible for you to come back in to the research that is going to produce these therapies. The veteran is the one that's going to get everybody to the table. In a very competitive political environment in Washington, we got to be behind our veteran. And in that regard, I'd like to ask every veteran in this audience to please stand up for us to thank them for their service. Would every veteran who's a member of the audience?
Yeah, thank you for your wonderful help in terms of destigmatizing mental health illnesses. But the medical community still has a long way to go. And in psychiatry in particular, I think we, and I'm a neurologist, don't do enough service to help destigmatize these illnesses. And how do you suggest we improve that situation?
Well, going back to my uncle's civil rights address, there used to be white-only water fountains and colored only. Now we have a system where there is healthy people who go to our healthcare system and morally defective people who go to our mental health system. Who wants to drink from the second-class status water fountain that is not really physical? Nobody. I contend that it's stigma that's killing our soldiers, because we didn't tell them that what they're suffering from is physiological, not a moral defect. Instead, we're doing what we do with all neurological disorders, and that's we're criminalizing behavior. We're locking people up because the prison system is the last mental health system in this country. We've got, in my state, we did a hearing on prisoners. 15% today going into the prison are veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. Literally, that's us locking up as prisoners of war in our own country the very people who fought for us. We don't have to wait for Al-Qaeda to take them prisoners of war. We're doing too good a job ourselves of locking them up. How outrageous is that? That is shameful. The real criminal indictment should be on America for not thinking about a more progressive way to treat these invisible wounds of war and making sure we save our veterans from even ending up in the criminal justice system. I would say we need to change all of our medical boards in America to say that you have to have a basic set of criteria on the neurophysiology of the brain and treatment of these disorders, because there isn't a doctor out there that doesn't treat all of these disorders in the course of treating what they're trained to do. And if they don't know, if an obstetrician or gynecologist doesn't know about trauma and how to treat PTSD when there is sexual trauma that's affecting women all over America, if they don't know how to do that, guess what? They're practicing without a license, in my book.
Congressman Kennedy, thank you very much for your inspirational speech. You and I have spoken about the need to frame this question in terms of national security, and I have expressed that to other members of the Rhode Island delegation as well. I want to point out to you that about 40% of the membership of the Society for Neuroscience is international, from 81 countries. And that comprises about 15,000 individuals of the Society for Neuroscience. So the question, perhaps from an international member, is that the follow-up of the Moonshot was the International Space Station, which usually cannot be served without the help of an old enemy of ours, Russia. So therefore, this individual would like to know how you and your colleagues, and how we also, can assure that this new movement will be an international and not just the United States initiative. Thank you.
Those are the kind of questions I usually ask because the answer is in the question. And you're basically asking someone to repeat what you already know the answer should be. It's international cooperation. The International Space Station. Thank you, you're getting my metaphor.
Thank you. I want to thank Congressman Kennedy so much for providing what I hope will be the first step on a grand journey. Thank you.